I will talk to my brothers about God my Father, and together we'll sing of His praises. I will talk to my brothers about God my Father, together we'll sing of His praises. Together we will sing His praises, hallelujah. Together we will sing His praises, hallelujah. La la la, hallelujah. La la la, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. La la la, hallelujah, hallelujah. I will talk to my brothers about God my Father, together we'll sing of His praises. I will talk to my brothers about God my Father, together we'll sing of His praises. Together we will sing His praises, hallelujah. Together we will sing His praises, hallelujah. La la la, hallelujah. La la la, hallelujah, hallelujah. La la la, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. And in another complete irony, He put laughter into my soul. A comedian was asked one time, how do you make yourself ready to go out on stage? In other words, how do you feel? Make yourself feel funny. He said, well, I put a piece of bologna in each one of my shoes. And then when I go out on stage, I definitely feel funny. I don't know what that has to do with anything spiritual, but it is. I once was dead, my spirit cold. I had no joy, far from the fold. Messiah came, He made me sing. Oh, He put laughter into my soul. Oh, come, let's sing, let us rejoice. Oh, come, let's sing, let us rejoice. Messiah's come, and He brought joy. Oh, He's brought laughter into my soul. Long ago they promised He'd bring us light. Long ago they promised He'd bring us light. A light to lighten our wandering feet. But He brought laughter into my soul. Oh, come, let's sing, let us rejoice. Oh, come, let's sing, let us rejoice. Messiah's come, and He's brought joy. Oh, He brought laughter into my soul. It would have been enough had He brought light. It would have been enough had He brought peace. It would have been enough had He brought love. But He brought laughter into my soul. Oh, come, let's sing, let us rejoice. Oh, come, let's sing, let us rejoice. Messiah's come, and He brought joy. Oh, He's brought laughter into my soul. Hine matov umanai shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov umanai shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. שבט אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבט אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבט אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבט אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומחניים, שבט אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומחניים, שבט אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומחניים, לה 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 לה. הנה מה טוב ומחניים, לה 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 לה. הנה מה טוב ומחניים, שבט אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומחניים, שבט אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומחניים, לה 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 לה. הנה מה טוב ומחניים, לה 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 לה. Behold how good and pleasant it is for brethren and sistren to dwell together in unity. Okay, so let's keep going. בימים ההם תיבשי יהודה וירושלים תשפטך. בימים ההם תיבשי יהודה וירושלים תשפטך. בצי שיתראה לך, אדוני צדקנו, אדוני צדקנו, אדוני צדקנו, צדקנו, אדוני צדקנו, אדוני צדקנו, אדוני צדקנו, צדקנו. In those days Judah shall be saved, and Jerusalem shall dwell in safety. In those days Judah shall be saved, and Jerusalem shall dwell in safety. Now this is the name by which it shall be called. This is the name by which it shall be called. The Lord our righteousness, the Lord our righteousness, the Lord our righteousness, our righteousness. The Lord our righteousness, the Lord our righteousness, Lord our righteousness, our righteousness. And here we want to בימים ההם תיבשי יהודה וירושלים תשפטך. בימים ההם תיבשי יהודה וירושלים תשפטך. יצא שיתראה לך, יצא שיתראה לך. אדוני צדקנו, אדוני צדקנו, אדוני צדקנו, צדקנו, אדוני Okay, so that came with its own interpretation. So that's good. We're done with that one. It's a good song. A real toe tapper for during the garden, digging the weeds. We could ask for more. All right. May the Lord protect and defend you. May He always shield you from shame. May you come to be in paradise, a shining name. May you be like Ruth and like Boaz. May you be deserving of praise. Strengthen them, O Lord, and keep them from the stranger's way. God bless you and grant you long. May the Lord fulfill our Sabbath prayer for you. May God make you good husbands, and may He cause your mates to always care for you. And you, may the Lord preserve you from pain. Favor them, O Lord, with happiness and peace. Oh, hear our Sabbath prayer. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. How'd that clicker work, huh?
Oh, the clicker works good.
Good. Awesome. Hey, Patrice.
Hi. Yeah, he said, I'm gonna go up with you, don't freak out. Like, I've been known to freak out while I came up. Anybody see me ever freak out when
Did you see what I'm wearing?
here? Ah, uh-huh. See,
Thank you.
perfect, you're
Thank
welcome.
you.
I love socks.
Oh.
You know, I think socks are great, and I wear them myself, just not tonight.
Cool, thanks.
Sunday. Yes, and I saw guitar socks, and who else are you gonna give guitar socks to?
Jimi Hendrix.
Well, if he was still with us and needed socks, I
Okay.
would definitely send them.
He doesn't need
No,
Right.
right
Oh, yeah,
now.
oh, so the connection is you gave him the socks?
Yes, oh, you didn't know?
No.
He didn't tell you?
I took them
But
out of the
also
package
they-
while you
they
were sitting
didn't
right
know
there.
When did I lose control?
Hey, Connie, that's Gary, that's Connie.
Yeah, right. And the socks.
And his socks. All right.
The Elkhorn toothbrush.
And then we'll talk later. Good evening, and welcome to Congregation Ohr Chadash. Shabbat Shalom. It's very nice to see all you. And even those I cannot see out in the Ethernet via the interwebs, it's nice to see you. I can feel you in my heart. And George, you need to stop that right now. Okay, there's nothing all that is surprising and exciting coming up. It's basically another week. Tomorrow morning is at 10 o'clock is our morning service here in this room at 10 o'clock. Tomorrow evening, my adorable husband over here, he and I will be doing Stump the Stars. I do want to say, I don't know about you, and this is a hypothetical, I don't want an answer. But if you are acquainted with or have heard about this mini-series called The Chosen, and you have watched it, John and I had never heard of it until somebody started discussing it in front of us, and since we had never heard of it and hadn't seen it, we were going, okay. Well, now we've seen an episode. Don't you want to know what we think about it? Wouldn't that be interesting to you? Yeah, that's on Stump the Stars tomorrow night, along with some of the issues that arise when modern people, and it could be, there have been dozens of these since the advent of the motion picture, Lives of Yeshua. Dozens of them. I myself have seen 8 of them. And there are always decisions. There's decisions about the words that the characters speak. There's decisions about the way their costumes look. There are decisions about the way the lighting comes across. There are all these decisions outside of a script which says the words that the biblical characters say. And that should be an introduction that it might be more complicated than you might think to produce this kind of a thing. And sure enough, it is. It's complicated. And we'll discuss those issues tomorrow night, Lord willing. Yes? Okay. I have your approval? Okay. Don't forget the blue boxes in the back are for your offerings to us. We do not turn our nose up or look askance at any gift, no matter how small. We can use them all. We are not independently wealthy, and we have a building that's a fixer-upper. So if you can see your way to clear, you can go on the Ohr Chadash website. You can pay through PayPal. And you can pay with credit card, you can mail us things, there's many different ways you could pay, but we would really appreciate your contributions. Well, that's all I have right now. Is there anything new that I'm forgetting? Okay, he says he doesn't know, so that's a good indication that we can get on with things. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm happy to see the skating when I get home and can relax. Have a lovely cup of tea. And so I'm happy to be here. Hope you are too. Shabbat Shalom.
And I too want to extend my greetings to those of you who are joining us virtually. We're happy to have you with us. And I will remind you, if you don't already have a copy, a hard copy of the Siddur, feel free to check in with us and order one. We've also sent them out by way of e-files, so you may want to check to see what you've got there. That gets us ready to get the service started formally. And as we do so as we've traditionally done, down through the years, through the centuries, and across the world, literally. We welcome Shabbat with Lakado Din, because we realize that Shabbat's a very special thing for us. It's the guarantee of God's covenant relationship with us. It's His sign that it's permanent. Every Shabbat we're reminded of that. And therefore it's an opportunity for us now as we stand, face the door, to welcome Shabbat as a queen. And we also anticipate the coming of the Messianic King and the time of eternal Shabbat. Pages 14 to 25.
Shabbat Come, my friend, meet the bride. Let's welcome the presence of the Sabbath. Observe and remember, in a single statement, the unique God caused us to hear his command. He alone is Lord, and his name is unique, to his fame and splendor and praise. Together, come, my friend, meet the bride. Let's welcome the presence of the Sabbath. Let's go to meet the Sabbath, for she is the source of blessing from the beginning, anointed from ancient days, though made last, conceived first. Come, my friend, meet the bride. Let's welcome the presence of the Sabbath.
Please be seated. And now as you focus your attention forward, it's time to light the Shabbat lights. And remember, he is our God, we are his people. And every Shabbat reminds us of that. It's forever.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has set us apart from your commandments and commanded us to light the candles for the Sabbath. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahayot v'goyim, V'natan lanu Yeshua Meshikenu ha'or le'olam. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctified us by your commandments and commanded us to be a light for the nations and gave us Yeshua our Messiah, the light of the world. Shabbat shalom.
He is truly the light of the world. He, in fact, will light up the world in the time of the Messianic age. In the meantime, he awaits those events as we do as well. And we see him sitting on the throne in the heavenly realms. And we join him in that scene on pages 40 and 41 with Ha'elohim Asher. Please join Jenny as she leads us.
Ha'elohim Asher diber, mikadem pamim rabot, u'virachim rabot el ha'avot, be'yad ha'nevi'im, tiker aleinu be'achari, hayamim ha'ele, be'yad ha'bein asher, Samei yoresh kol, yado, tamasa et ha'olamim, uzohar kevodo, b'tselem atzmuto, venosei kol bidbaro, rav hagvura, ulachar she'asa, tibur chatayim, yashar le'elim, ha'abdullah. In the past, God spoke to our fathers through the prophets at many times in various ways. But now, at the end of days, he has spoken to us by the Messiah, his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. The Son is the full radiance of God's glory, and the flawless manifestation of his reality. He sustains all things by his powerful word. After he made atonement for sins, he sat down in the place of authority, beside the majesty in heaven. True and firm, established and lasting, right and faithful, loved and treasured, desired and pleasant, feared and mighty, ordered and acceptable, good and beautiful is this word to us forever and ever.
Interestingly, that particular response to Elohim Asher ties in very closely with our parsha for this evening, as you will see. But it also fulfills a picture that the sages of old had, that the Messiah would sit on one of those heavenly thrones. Our reading portions this evening are on pages 60 to 63, the abridged and summary. So I ask you to join me there as you rise, facing Jerusalem, to the direction of the ark. And we will see that there's a hope, there's an anticipation that's embedded within the abridged end of the abridged section. We ask that we would get to see the flourishing of the throne of David and the lengthening of the life of your Messiah, even in our days. First part is done quietly. Second part, the summary, is done responsibly. Make these your words as you respond. Baruch atah Adonai, Shomea tefillah. Blessed are you, O Lord, you do in fact hear our prayers. Baruch atah Adonai Elohim, Elohei Elokim, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, Ha'el HaGadol, HaGadol, V'Hanora, El Elyon, K'nei Shemayim, V'Aretz. Blessed are you, O Lord our God. You're the God of our ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Sarah, Rebekah, and Rachel. You are the great, the mighty, the revered God. You are the Most High God, who is Master of heaven and earth.
Magen Avot Bidavaro, Machael Metim Bomamaro, Ha'el HaKadosh, She'en Kamohu, Ha'meniach Le'amro, Be'yom Shabbat Kadesho, Ki Bam Ratzah Lahaniach Lahem, Lefanav Navot B'yirah V'achad, Ve'nodeh Lishmo B'kol Yom. Tamid Ma'en Havorachot, El HaHodaot, Adon HaShalom, Mekadesh HaShabbat, Umbarek Shavi'i, Umaniach B'Kedusha, Le'amedu Shnei Oneg, Zecher, Lamaseh Bereshit, Zecher, Lamaseh Bereshit. Together, he with his word was a shield to our forefathers, and by his voice will raise the dead. The holy God, like whom there is none, who gives rest to his people on his holy Sabbath day, because he delights in them to grant them rest. Before his presence we will serve with fear and awe. Daily and constantly we will thank him with the appropriate praises. He is the God to whom thanksgiving is due, the Lord of peace, who hallows the Sabbath and blesses the seventh day, and in holiness gives rest to a people filled with delights in remembrance of the creation.
Our God and God of our ancestors, accept our rest. Hallow us by your commandments. Grant our portion in your Torah. Satisfy us with your goodness. Gladden us with your salvation. Purify our hearts to serve you fruitfully. And in your love and favor, O Lord our God, let us inherit your holy Sabbath. And may Israel, who sanctify your name, rest thereon. Baruch atah Adonai, Makadesh HaShabbat. Blessed are you, O Lord. You make Shabbat special. Please be seated. Some of you are already aware of this. We prayed for her last week, Barbara Shorota, and sometime shortly after services, Barbara died. And Barbara was an important part of the synagogue family, although we haven't seen her since COVID. But we want to do what we do traditionally as a Jewish community, and that is those who know her. I'm going to ask that you please stand, as is our custom. Our custom is to respond in memory and in honor and in love of ones who have passed on with some form of, one of a couple forms of Kaddish. We're using Sephardic Kaddish, pages 156 and 157. Sometimes this is misunderstood as a prayer for the dead, but it really is a prayer of response to God, even in these kinds of difficult circumstances. A response to God that says, yes, God, you're gracious and loving, even in these kinds of circumstances. So it's not a prayer for the dead, but it's a prayer because someone has died. And we need to remind ourselves of the graciousness of God even in those kinds of times and express our gratitude to Him. Pages 156 and 157 is Sephardic Kaddish, and you'll see that in it, in this form of Kaddish, is the hope that even in our days, God will bring about the reign of His Messiah, and at that time, there will be time at the resurrection of the dead. Respond with the amens and the brichu in the appropriate spots, as Jenny leads us.
יתגדל יתגדש שמר אמן והעולם יברח חירותי וימלך מלכותי ויצמח פורקני ויפרב משיחי וחייכון וגמכון וחי וכל בית ישראל ויגלו בזמן קריב יאמרו אמן יהי שמרה במדורה לעולם עולם מעולמיה יתברך. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם עולם מעולמיה יתברך. וישתבח ויתפאר ויתחמם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי לחוד שבריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה, וישרתה תושבתה ונחמתה, תאמרן בעלמה וימרו אמן. יהי שלום הרב מן שמיה, וחיים טובים עלינו, ויעלכו ישראל וימרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, ויעלכו ישראל וימרו Amen. Glorified and sanctified be His great name in the world which is created according to His will. May He bring about the reign of His kingdom and cause His salvation to spread and bring near His Messiah in your lifetime and in your days, and in the life of all the house of Israel, speedily, yes, soon, and let us say, Amen. May His great name be blessed forever and forever, eternally. Blessed and praised, glorified and exalted, extolled and honored, adored and lauded be the name of the Holy One. Blessed be He, who is high above, far above all blessings and hymns, and praises and consolations which are spoken in the world, and say, Amen. May there be great peace from heaven, and good life for us and for all Israel, and let us say, Amen. He who makes peace in the heavenly realms, may He make peace for us and for all Israel, and let us all say, Amen.
Please be seated. We turn now to pages 44 and 45 for Mithumoka. An interesting passage, a very wonderful text that reminds us of the awesomeness of the God whom we serve. But it's also part of the song at the sea. And during the song at the sea, one of the Jewish traditions is this, that part of that response included not just what we sing, but what's earlier on in the text. Part of it can be translated that we are asking God to make a home among us. It becomes a very important response, especially in the parshiot beginning last week and for the next couple of weeks that have to do with God's home among us in the Shabbat. And it's also an important reminder that He's very much concerned about our daily lives in every way. Which is why we then praise our exalted God. Blessed is he who is to be blessed. Moses and the people of Israel sang this song to you with great joy. They all said, and now we all say,
Who is like you, O Lord among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, awesome in praises, doing wonders? Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha ne'er b'kodesh, no hara tehilo, o say, mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha ne'er b'kodesh, no hara tehilo, o say,
The question has been raised. The question needs to be answered. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Actually, Ein Kamocha tells us there is none like you, O Lord, among the gods. Awesome in holiness, glorious in praises, doing wonders. Jenny leads us in that response, pages 88 and 89, and we rise for that as we find ourselves standing in the presence of this great God who is our King.
Ein kamocha be'Elohim Adonai va'ein kamasecha, Malchutka malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai imod le'olam va'ed, Adonai oz le'mo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. Together, there is none like you among the gods, my Lord, and there is nothing that compares to your deeds. Your kingdom is a kingdom that endures for all eternity, and your sovereignty extends throughout all generations. The Lord reigns, the Lord has reigned, the Lord shall reign throughout eternity. The Lord will bless his people with peace.
Your sovereignty extends throughout all generations as part of our response. And now that response we add to with the Shema, which says, your sovereignty, O Lord, I want to reign throughout the whole of my life. Join us on pages 34 to 39 as we express that reality that we desire as we turn and face Jerusalem.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem, Kevod Malchuto, Va'ed. Ve'alta et Adonai Elohecha, Be'kol levacha, u'kol nafshecha, u'kol miredecha. Ve'hayu hadarim ha'eleh, asher Anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha. Ve'shiratam al levavecha, ve'dibarta bam, ve'shivtecha lebetecha, u'dachtecha b'derech, u'shachbecha u'begomecha, u'kshatam ve'ota yadecha, ve'hayu letotafot be'einecha, u'k'tavtam al mezuzot beitecha, u'bisharecha. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Blessed be he whose glorious kingdom is eternal. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your life, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as reminders on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates.
The reality that we request for ourselves is the reality we anticipate for all people in the future. It's embodied in the response by Hebrew Silla, pages 88 and 89. It looks forward to the time when from Zion will go forth the Torah and the word of the Lord from out of Jerusalem.
ויהי בן צהרון ויאמר משה קום אדוני ויפוץ אויביך וינוסו מזנך מפניך
כי מציון תצא תורה כי מציון תצא תורה ודבר אדוני בירושלים ברוך שנתן תורה תורה ברוך שנתן תורה תורה לעמו ישראל בקדושתו.
And it came to pass, whenever the ark went forward, Moses would say, Arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered. May those who hate you flee from before you. For from Zion shall go forth the Torah, and the word of the Lord out of Jerusalem. Blessed be he who in holiness gave the Torah to his people Israel. Mishavarach Avotinu Abraham Yitzchak Yaakov. He who blessed our fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. May he bless Rabbi John, and may he bless Al, who have come up to honor God and the Torah. May the Holy One bless them and their families, and send blessing and prosperity on all the work of their hands. Baruch et Adonai Havorach, Baruch Adonai Havorach Le'olam Vaed. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachadanu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai, noten ha'torah.
Amen.
Bless the Lord who is blessed. Bless the Lord who is blessed forever and ever. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who chose us from all peoples and gave to us the Torah. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah.
Please follow along with me as you find the passage on the inside of your order of service. Ve'ata tetzaveh et b'nei Yisrael v'yithu elaka shavin zayit Zakatid ma'or leha'olah ner tamid be'ohel moed. And you are to instruct the children of Israel. Oh, please be seated. That they are to take for you olive oil, pure, beaten, or refined in that case, for the light, or to illumine the Ner Tamid, the eternal light, in the tent of meeting, or the Mishkan. Interestingly enough, Ner Tamid is also the term for the light that's above the Aron Kodesh, or the Ark, in most synagogues. So it's a reflection back on that. There are some who would say, some of the sages in our past, that this was not just to be an instruction of the children of Israel, but it's to be part of their transformation, interestingly enough. We'll reflect more, catch that, we'll reflect more on that a little later.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah ve'emet, v'chayei olam mitzavotoheinu. Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
Amen.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who gave us the Torah of truth and life everlasting planted in our midst. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah.
Life everlasting planted in our midst, like a tree of life. That's training. Sorry, before we get to that, I got so excited by the transformation from one to the other. You need to recognize where all this comes from. These are the words that God delivered to us through the hand of Moses. The Zod HaTorah. Pages 98 and 99. If you need the transliteration, it's page 95. Please stand as we acknowledge not only these words, but the God who gave us these words, more appropriately, words for our lives.
Zod HaTorah, Asher Sam Moshe, Lifnei Yisrael, Ohi Adonai, Kriyat Moshe. This is the Torah which Moses placed before the children of Israel. It is in accord with the Lord's command by the hand of Moses.
Please be seated. And now we get to Etz Chaim, the tree of life, planted in our midst. It should, in fact, be transformative, as our text tonight, our parsha tonight suggested. And so we ask, renew our days as of old. Pages 96 and 97, the sad response.
Etz Chaim Kira Ma'chazikim Ba, Eitom Cheha Me'usha, Deracheha, Darchei Noam, Ve'kol Nativoteha, Shalom. Hashivenu Adonai Alecha, Ve'nashuva, Kadesh Abinu, Kadesh Yameinu, Kipedem. Hashivenu Adonai Alecha, Ve'nashuva, Kadesh Abinu, Kadesh Yameinu, Kipedem. A tree of life is those who go to take hold of it, and happy are those who support it. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. Turn us, Lord, to you, and let us return. Renew our days as of old.
Our response at this time, Uznuko Yomar, reflects yet another reality connected with the Parsha for tonight. It reflects the reality that we can stand as priests before our God. And we can serve Him and worship Him in much the same way as the priests of old. So I invite you now to stand, to respond on pages 98 and 99, and respond with the gratitude that comes with the reality that we get to share.
Unucho Yomar Shua, Adonai Revotam Yisrael. When they are rested, Moses would say, return, O Lord, to the myriads of Israel's families. Arise, O Lord, to your resting place, you and your mighty ark. Clothe your priests with righteousness. May those who have experienced your faithful love shout for joy. For the sake of your servant David, don't delay the return of your Messiah. Va'avor David Avdecha, al teshev penei mi shachecha. Ki l'chachto natati lechem, torati al ta'azovu. I give you good instruction. Do not forsake my Torah.
And I give you the usual good instruction. Please treat those around you.
Good. How are you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to wait for me to tell you to sit down. If you don't sit down soon enough, I will tell you to sit down. Last week's Parsha included that awesome passage that built literally around a text early on in the Parsha and its amazing reality. When God said, make for me a sanctuary, sacred place, that I might live among them. That God would actually live among His people. That's amazing. That reality comes to fruition in all its fullness in the text that's coming up, I think like 3 weeks from now. The closing portion of the book of Shemot, or Exodus. It's when the Mishkan, the tabernacle, has now been finally completed. Everything has been placed in its proper place and its proper order. And then God moves in to His home and into their neighborhood. And it was such an amazing encounter that even Moses had to take a step back, as did all the people of Israel. That reality is reinforced by a passage near the end of the book of Leviticus, where the God says, not only have I moved in among you, but I will walk among your tents. Leviticus 26, verses 11 and 12. God in our neighborhood. Another part of that reality we need to understand as we frame that particular picture is that it's expressed in Jeremiah chapter 2 and verse 2, where God says, like a young bride, you followed me in the wilderness. So this time in the wilderness was in effect a honeymoon between God and His people. That means that this awesome reality that we were looking at last week and will continue over the next number of weeks, namely the Mishkan and its building, that awesome reality is in effect, if you would have it, a combination of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood and honeymoon house. And both aspects are true. Now, this week's Parsha has to do with the priests and with their duties, and with the high priest and the clothes he wears. That's interesting stuff, maybe. What happens in the Parsha as we look through it is that they, the priest, and he, the high priest, gets to go in and tend to their daily duties, and some of those are prescribed for us in this text. Now, the Parsha for this week begins in chapter 27, verses 28 following. I read just the first couple lines of the first verse of that. It begins with the lighting of the menorah that stood in what was called the holy place within the temple. Within the tabernacle. And as such, the priests were told to tend to it so that it would cast its light in a very special way in that particular location. In a sense, it was a picture of God lighting up his home with his presence. And then the Parsha for tonight concludes with chapter 30, verses 1 to 10, with the burning of incense on a daily basis on what is called the altar of incense, or the golden altar. That stood just before what was the inner veil of the Mishkan, or the tabernacle. And on the other side of that veil was, of course, the Ark of the Covenant in God's very presence. So this offering of the incense, then, was a way in which you honored or showed respect to a great dignitary, in this case, to God himself, who was the head of that house. So on a daily basis, the priests and the high priest got to go into the Mishkan. They got to experience God's presence. And that was further reinforced, by the way, speaking of his presence, with the third item that was in the holy place, called the table for the bread of the presence, of God's presence. So that was part of their reality, to experience and encounter God in this very special way. But it raises the question, but when did the people ever get to go into this house, into this honeymoon home? I mean, after all, it was our honeymoon home. So, when is it, or when was it our turn, my turn to go in, the people might say. Well, let me suggest that that is part of the lesson of the high priest's specific and unique clothes. So the first lesson is this. Some of you may have heard this saying before, clothes make the man. And now, in our day and age, we need to say clothes make the person. But you remember that phrase, perhaps. And so we look at some of these clothes. Exodus chapter 28, in the very next chapter, after our passage begins. Verse 11. God says, engrave the names of the children of Israel on the 2 stones, the way a gem cutter engraves a seal. Let me step out of that for just a minute. Engrave the names, in other words, as a memorial, so that you understand their reality in an ongoing way. But that reminded me of another very important text. It's Isaiah 49, verse 16, where God says in response to the people's despair, I have engraved you in the palms of my hands. So this is the same kind of imagery that we have here. Back to our text. So, engrave the 2 stones in the same way a gem cutter engraves a seal, and fasten them on the shoulder pieces of the ephod as memorial stones for the sons, the children of Israel. Aaron is to bear the names on his shoulders as a memorial before the Lord. So every time he went into God's presence, in a sense, he was taking us with him on his shoulders, bearing us, so to speak. And God would take notice. Again, I don't like the term take notice. It's not quite deep or intensive enough. But God would take notice, would remember his people. And then the text goes on a little later, a few verses later in verse 20. Whenever Aaron enters the holy place, he will bear the names of the children of Israel over his heart on the breastpiece of decision as a continuing memorial before the Lord. So they may be over Aaron's heart whenever he enters the presence of the Lord. Again, as a memorial, when he goes in the presence of God, the names of our people are there on his heart. And that sets us up then for another part of the lessons of the high priest's clothes. And for this, let me steal a headline from just this past week. Major League Baseball calls for a mediator. You don't need to know all the details of that, and I'm not going to get into them. The high priest role in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, as described here, is that of mediator or advocate. When he goes into the presence of God, he's got us on his shoulder. When he goes in the presence of God, he's got us on his heart. So he bears our burdens, and he, in fact, sympathizes with our emotions and our feelings. And this happens, please remember, on a daily basis. Every day he goes in, that's the reality. It happens in a very special way. Every day when he goes into the presence of God, where the place is lit up by God's light, where the bread of the presence is there, and where he gets to, on our behalf, offer incense, a gratitude and honor to the one who's the great King. He does that in a very special way on Yom Kippur, only then he has different clothes that he wears. And on that day, remember, he goes in on our behalf. And first, he brings a sacrifice for himself, so that there can be atonement, an unhindered relationship between himself and our God. And then, having taken care of his situation, he then comes back out, gets another sacrifice, and brings that before our God, again, on our behalf, as our advocate. Now, these are interesting pictures. These were part of the reality that the priests and the high priest got to experience on a daily basis. But they were more than that. They anticipated something to come in the future, namely a messianic priest. And in fact, that hope was exemplified in some of the statements found in the Dead Sea Scrolls in a place called Qumran. But it is also something that's reflected in the prophets. Zechariah chapter 6, verses 9 to 13 speaks of the high priest at that time, whose name was, of all things, Joshua. Yeshua's a virtual synonym of the name Joshua. And Joshua, the high priest, is called there the branch. Branch is a messianic term of anticipation. And then he's described as a high priest, he gets a crown. And then he gets to sit on a throne. Priests don't do that. Kings do that. So this is the anticipation that derives from the scene that is set all the way back in our parsha. And in fact, it lays the groundwork for seeing Yeshua as the high priest and advocate for us. Great Rabbi of old, writing to his student Timothy, said the following, 1 Timothy 2, verses 5 and 6. For there is one God and one advocate or mediator between God and people, the person, Messiah Yeshua. And here's how he's connected. Who gave himself as a ransom for all. Who gave himself as a ransom for all. By the way, the term atonement means to ransom by means of a substitute. And so that very terminology is here in this particular text. It raises the question, how does he do this? Well, the author of the book of Hebrews enlightens us with that, in that regard. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11. When the Messiah came as high priest of the good things that are already here, and if you have a Bible that gives you some of the alternative, call them translations or text, this one says, some manuscripts here say, good things to come. I'm going to suggest that it's not one or the other. It really is both. That's the reality that was the reality of the early Messianic movement. He came as a high priest of the good things that are already here, but of the good things that are to come as well. We experience in part what we're going to experience in full in the future. Okay. He came, and when he did this, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle or mishkan that is not made with human hands. That is to say, it's not part of this creation. There was a heavenly model, and we reflected on that, I think, just last week, when we looked at the Parsha last week. And so, a few verses later, it then says, for this reason, Messiah is the mediator, here's that term again, of a new covenant, that those who are called, by the way, who are called? What have our people been called down through the ages and the generations throughout the world? God's chosen people. These are the ones. God calls us that. So those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. Remember, down through the ages too, God promised these things by means of a covenant. You'll notice covenant is found in this text. By means of a covenant all the way up to the time of Abraham. Added to from the mountain, Sinai, in the Mosaic covenant. We find somewhat in the Davidic covenant. And then the prophets speak of this new covenant. By the way, the term new here really ought to be translated renewed. It is viewed that way in the context of Jeremiah 31 to 33, where it was first given. And in fact, the terms that are used reinforce that as well. The Hebrew term for new covenant is Brit Chadashah. Chadashah is renewed. You know that already because you sang Chadesh Amenu, Chadesh Amenu, which means, there's that term, Chadesh, renew our days as of old. So, this particular covenant, it goes on to say, now he has died as a ransom to set them free from sins committed. There's that term, ransom again. So, the process that was involved in our Parsha, where the priests were involved in this business of atonement, ultimately Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, to an even greater degree. This is something that he himself, as our high priest, did for us. Which raises the question that I raise frequently. New, in Yiddish. So what? Well, that brings me to a passage in the next chapter of Hebrews that's related to this. Therefore, he says, chapter 10, verse 19. Friends, since we have confidence to enter into the holy place because of the blood of Yeshua, in other words, because of what he's done, we now get to enter into the holy place. If we enter into the holy place, what does that make us? Priests, right? Those are the ones who go into the holy place. But God had promised he would make us a nation of priests. Okay, we do so because of the blood of Yeshua, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, namely through his body, in the sense of that he gave himself up to produce this new and living way. So there was that curtain, there was that veil. And Yeshua created a way through that veil for all of us now to enter in. Now, I'm going to build on that in just a minute, but first I want to say something about that curtain. That curtain that led into the holy place, Josephus describes in an amazing way. It looked like the heavens with the stars and the constellations and the moon. It was an amazing piece of work. And so, it's through that veil we get to enter now as his priests. And so he says, since we have a great high priest over the house of God, there's that honeymoon house again, he says, let us draw near to God. Now, don't misunderstand this. One of the terms in Hebrew for offering is related to the term, is in fact built on the term karav. It means to draw near. So catch that? We now get to draw near. We now, in a sense, get to bring offerings to God. And we do so, we should do so, and in fact we should draw near as well, as in the sense of coming into his presence on a regular basis, in full assurance of faith. In other words, we can come before him, we can live before him with the full confidence that our faith and our trust provides for us. And then here's this interesting description. Having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed with pure water. Once again, this takes us back to the Mishkan and the way in which it functioned. Because outside the holy place, in the courtyard, there was not only the altar for sacrifices, there was something called the laver, which is where the priests went to get their hands washed before they entered in. So it's that imagery that's here. Our hearts are sprinkled to cleanse from a guilty conscience, our bodies washed with pure water. Oh, by the way, this also builds on that wonderful text found in Ezekiel chapter 36, which I share with you as frequently as I can, even when it's not the Haftarah. God says, I will sprinkle clean water on you. I will plant within you a new heart. I will give you a heart of flesh. I will pour my spirit upon you. So all of that is built into this particular text, which then allows us to say and confidently enact in our lives, let us hold unswervingly to the hope that we have. Despite what goes on around us, we can hold on to this hope and share it with others. For he who promised is faithful. In other words, not because of what we do, but because of who he is. Again, the promise is fulfilled. And then he says, and, doesn't stop there, and let us consider what? How we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, or good works, or mitzvot. We should be, I was going to say encouragement, that comes in just a second. We should help motivate others towards love and towards a life that's lived in accordance with God's instructions. And then it says, let us not give up meeting together. Interesting Greek term for that phrase. It's a Greek term, and you won't need a whole lot of Greek to recognize this. Episynagoge. Synagoge. Episynagoge. In other words, don't stop getting together as a synagogue. So, all of you here are commended because you haven't stopped doing that. And you're here tonight. That's part of what we should be doing, and encouraging others to do the same. And in fact, speaking of encouraging others, let us encourage one another, all the more as you see the day approaching. So even though things seem to be getting worse and worse, we should provide an encouragement to one another. That's part of what comes out of this reality that our particular parsha unfolds for us. Oh, and the rabbi says this in Ephesians chapter 2 at the end. He says, we are built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, the followers and leaders of Yeshua's early movement, as well as the prophets going back into old, with Yeshua himself as our chief cornerstone. In other words, this is a building that's being envisioned, as you can tell. In him, the whole building is joined together and rises, get this, to become a holy temple in the Lord. We become part of the temple, the Mishkan, in which God lives. And in fact, it says that. And in him, you too are being built together to become a dwelling, a Mishkan, in which God lives by his Spirit. Striking. We can not only come in his presence, but we in fact become the dwelling in which his presence can be seen, can be experienced, and can be expressed. And if that sounds radical to you, something really new for this particular renewed covenant, let me suggest the following. Back to the key verse from last week's parsha. God says, make for me a sanctuary, a sacred place, that I might live or dwell. Betochem. Usually translated among them. But our Hasidic friends, in centuries past as well as in the present, remind us that Betochem can mean not just among them, but in them. And so they see the reality of these verses we've been looking at as God not just among his people, but in his people. And that becomes a reality then that we need to express to each other and to those around us. Well, much more to this story, but for right now, we conclude. Take to heart what we're supposed to be doing. Drawing near to our God on a daily basis, holding unswervingly to the hope that's in front of us, spurring one another on to love good works, encouraging one another. Plenty to do. Take it on as part of your task. Elaine reminds us in just a minute that we have a call and a task. This is part of it. But for now, time of reflection and quiet. The Hebrews text reminded us that he's become a high priest not only of the things that are here, but of things to come. Elenu anticipates that reality. It's a time when the world will be perfected under the rule of the Lord Almighty. All abominations will cease, all false gods will be eliminated. We anticipate that as well as we rise now, facing Jerusalem, joining on pages 102 to 107. To not only express that anticipation, but make our affirmation that our call truly is the task we do.
We hope, O Lord our God, to soon behold the majestic glory, when all abominations shall be removed, and all false gods shall be at an end. Then shall the world be perfected under the rule of the Lord Almighty, and all mankind shall call upon your name. For to you every knee must bow, and every tongue declare that you are God. Reign over us soon and forever. May the kingdom of David's greater Son be established forever. For then shall the words be fulfilled. The Lord shall be king forever, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord shall be one, and his name one.
Please be seated. And now I want to say a Shabbat Shalom to those of you who joined us virtually. We're grateful that you were with us. And now we're going to cut off the live stream so we can share with one another matters that are